So, how would you like to redo 2023? And no, I'm not talking about that failed attempt at a diet. We're talking about investment. I'm John Authers. I write the daily Points of Return newsletter, and I'm the chief markets commentator here at Bloomberg Opinion. As we approach the final trading days in 2023, I'd like to introduce you to Hindsight Capital, a hedge fund that always gets it right. If you take a look at the trades that somebody armed with perfect hindsight would have made on January 1st, you get a much better idea of how you could at least have beaten the market. Just to be clear, Hindsight Capital LLC doesn't exist. It's a figment of my imagination. If you really could invest with the benefit of hindsight, the returns would be infinite. So I've also put some restrictions on them. No trading through the year, no investing in individual stocks, no use of leverage. This is a fun exercise usually that reveals some very interesting things about the market. If you'd like to torture yourself to learn how you could have made so much more money, Hindsight Capital's trades will tell you. Let's start with the two most important things you needed to grasp at the beginning of this year. First, there wasn't going to be a recession in the US, at least not in 2023. And second, the rebound in China after reopening from COVID was going to be much weaker than many at the time were expecting. That takes you straight to the first trade they're making, which is to go long the Magnificent Seven stocks in the US and short the CSI 300 Chinese index. Now, for those of you who are new to the world of hedge funds, there is one trick that I do allow Hindsight Capital, and that is to sell short. In other words, you borrow a stock or a commodity and then sell it, which means that if the price goes down, you can buy it back and keep the profit. It's a very important tool for managing risk, and in the hands of Hindsight Capital, it becomes a great way to make money. The Magnificent Seven, for the uninitiated, are the 7 biggest companies in the US. They make up more than a third of the entire S&P. We now have an index for them which more than doubled during the year. Plenty of people wanted to make a positive bet on Chinese stocks because the argument at the beginning of the year was that it was going to reopen in a big way, that consumers would start streaming into the stores once more. If they didn't, then the Chinese government would help out with a big stimulus to boost things. That one way or the other, foreign investors were going to win. What they perhaps didn't grasp was that behavior wasn't going to change that fast, that people were still feeling very conservative, and that the Chinese administration at this point is very concerned to avoid a financial crisis, and Xi Jinping did not want to overstimulate if he could possibly avoid it. So those calculations about China were awfully wrong. The enduring lesson from this is that there is money in knowing something that other people are wrong about. It doesn't mean that you should always bet against the consensus, because the consensus is often right. But the really serious money to be made is when the market is convinced it knows something and you're confident that they're wrong. In the case of Hindsight Capital, that means actually actively betting against China and putting all that money into the Magnificent Seven. That's a very risky thing to do. Next, Hindsight took on cryptocurrency. More or less every year, one of Hindsight's big trades involves Bitcoin. It's just it tends to vary between being short Bitcoin and long. This year, after an extremely successful short bet on Bitcoin in 2022, which ended with the dramatic collapse of FTX under Sam Bankman-Fried, it was clear to Hindsight Capital that that had been taken now too far, and that with a return to concerns about whether central banks were going to be too lenient, too easy by the end of this year you would see Bitcoin resurge. It did. It well more than doubled. There are many ways you could have coupled that investment in Bitcoin to juice it up a little. The one they chose was palladium, a precious metal which Bloomberg does actually classify as a currency whose great use is in internal combustion engines, i.e. cars that aren't EVs. Betting against palladium and taking that money that you've made from that bet to put into Bitcoin would have made you a quite ridiculous sum of money. It should have been a fairly straightforward play that this was a metal that was not in a good place and that there was every risk that its price was going to come down quite sharply, which it did. What we can learn from this is that with Bitcoin, it's all about speculation. But if you can see that the emotion on a speculation has got to an infeasibly low ebb, then that becomes the time to buy. Hindsight's next trade was a pairing of two very different commodities. It sold short European natural gas and bought gold with the proceeds. Why? Well, in the case of natural gas in Europe, you needed to grasp two things. One, there wasn't going to be a particularly serious winter, so there wouldn't be a great demand for heating and there wouldn't be that much of a use for the natural gas. And two, the Ukraine conflict was going to continue, was going to grumble on, but without having any further major effects on the supply of natural gas. Meanwhile, gold. If you're worried that central banks are going to be too lenient, if you think they're going to blink, gold always has its benefits. Perhaps the key point to grasp from this is that very important macro events can often hinge on assumptions you don't even quite realize you're making. It's very easy to get carried away with really extreme possibilities when those possibilities are beginning to look more realistic. And in this case, hindsight caught up with that, bet against it, and profited. So that's how Hindsight Capital made bank in 2023. At this point, I think I know the next question, which is, what are their trades for 2024? And unfortunately, Hindsight Capital never lets me know. We'll just have to wait another year. Now, if you'd like to get the chapter and verse on exactly what Hindsight Capital did to make all this money, you can get it from the Points of Return newsletter, which you can subscribe to for free.